These are the lecture notes for Chapter 7, the muscular system. And I want to go ahead and mention that we are going to focus on the skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscles and how they function. So muscle tissue, just a little overview and a review of material that we've already learned. Muscle tissue is one of the 4 primary tissue types. The other 3 are epithelial, connective, and nervous tissue. So muscle tissue consists of elongated muscle cells, which we call muscle fibers, and they are specialized for contraction. There are 3 types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found lining the blood vessels, lining the intestines and the digestive tract, lining the airways, like the trachea and the bronchi and the bronchioles, lining the urinary tract. So smooth muscle is found lining pathways that move fluids or air or solid along, and it is involuntary muscle. Cardiac muscles found in the heart, and skeletal muscles are found within the muscles that connect to our bones that help us to move. So skeletal muscles are composed of skeletal muscle tissue, but also they contain connective tissue, nerves, and blood vessels, and they are directly or indirectly attached to bones. The connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone, remember, is called a tendon. And the muscular system includes about 700 skeletal muscles total. You don't have to learn all of them, but that's how many there are. There are 5 functions of just skeletal muscle, not the other 2 types, but just skeletal muscle. One is to move the skeleton. The muscles are attached to the bones of the skeleton by tendons most of the time, and the muscles will pull on tendons, and that will cause the bones to move. But skeletal muscles also can help maintain posture and body position, because there are some muscles that are constantly in a low state of contraction, like a constant state of contraction, even when we are relaxed. That gives us muscle tone, and it also helps us to maintain posture and body position, without having to really think about it. Skeletal muscle tissue can support soft tissues. So if you think about in your abdominal cavity, there's really no bones that protect your stomach and your intestines, but there is a layer of abdominal muscles, and those help support the soft organs and soft tissues deeper in the abdominal wall, in the abdominal cavity. The muscles that guard entrances and exits are called sphincters. And then muscles help to maintain body temperature. The more muscles contract, we generate body heat. Now, what you need to know about skeletal muscle tissue is, first of all, at the cellular level, a skeletal muscle cell, an individual cell, is called a muscle fiber. So one muscle fiber would be an individual cell. And there are 3 connective tissues that you need to know: epimysium, paramysium, and endomysium. And I can show you a lot better. If you look at, for example, here, it's showing you the muscles of the forearm. So if you look at one of the muscles, one of the individual muscles, like a biceps muscle or a triceps muscle, or one of the flexors or extensors of the forearm, you just take that one muscle out. Then the whole muscle is surrounded by the epimysium. And the epimysium will fuse, the epimysium of all these muscles will fuse into tendons toward the end of the muscle. But the epimysium surrounds the entire muscle fiber. And within the muscle fiber, we have muscle fascicles, and those are surrounded by the paramysium. And within the muscle fascicles, A bundle of muscle fibers forms a muscle fascicle, and then a bundle of muscle fascicles forms the whole muscle. So individual muscle fibers are surrounded by endomysium. So that's kind of how it works. Epimysium covers the entire muscle. Perimysium divides the muscle into fascicles or bundles of muscle fibers, and endomysium covers each muscle fiber. And all of that tissue kind of is continuous and blends in and forms like a continuous layer of connective tissue that ends up becoming a tendon. Now, tendons are bundles of fibers, connective tissue fibers that attach the muscle to the bone. And tendons are more like a cord, but an aponeurosis is a broad sheet of those same types of protein fibers that connect muscles to each other. So an example of an aponeurosis is, well, you'll just have to imagine this, I guess, in your mind, is there is a muscle that covers over your forehead called the frontalis muscle. You know, the bone there is called the frontal bone. Then there's a frontalis muscle. And then at the back of your head, there is the occipital bone, and the muscle is called the occipitalis. So there's an aponeurosis. It's called an epicranial aponeurosis that connects the frontalis to the occipitalis. So that's an aponeurosis. It's this really broad, wide sheet of these white fibers that connect basically your forehead to the back of your head. Okay, your skeletal muscles are under voluntary control. They're the only ones of the three muscle types that you can voluntarily control. They require stimulation by the central nervous system. And checkpoint question 3, how would severing the tendon attached to a muscle affect the muscle's ability to move a body part? Well, it would cause it not to be able to move the body part. The muscle has to be attached to the bone to cause movement. It has to be pulling on the bone to cause movement. So the movement wouldn't be able to happen. Okay, skeletal muscle fibers can be very long. Some can be 24 inches long, especially if it's a tall person. If you think about your quadriceps, the muscles of your thigh muscles, for a very tall person, that muscle can be up to 2 feet long. That's hard to imagine, but it can. Each muscle fiber is multinucleate, meaning it has hundreds of nuclei rather than one nucleus. And skeletal muscle fibers are striated, formed by the overlapping of actin and myosin in those muscles. All right, some terminology. So in a typical cell, we call the portion of the cell that separates the cell from its environment, we call that the plasma membrane. But in the muscle cell, we call it the sarcolemma. The cytoplasm of the muscle cell is called the sarcoplasm. And the sarcoplasm contains openings that lead into a network of tubules called transverse tubules, or we will just call them T-tubules. The purpose of the T-tubules is to allow electrical impulses from the sarcoplasm to reach the interior of the cell. And that allows unified contraction of the entire muscle fiber. So 3 terms right now. We know the sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of a muscle fiber, sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm, and T-tubules conduct impulses from the sarcoplasm to the interior of the cell, of the muscle fiber. Now, myofibrils run the length of the muscle fiber. So the muscle fiber or muscle cell itself is divided into units called myofibrils. The myofibrils are composed of bundles of myofilaments, thick and thin myofilaments. The thin filaments are actin, the thick filaments are myosin, and their shortening is what creates a contraction. We have another term within a muscle fiber called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. As you might guess, it's the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, but it's smooth endoplasmic reticulum rather than rough. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium ions, and we're going to find out how important calcium ions are in a muscle contraction. So on either side of a T-tubule, the sarcoplasmic reticulum kind of has these expanded portions that you find on either side of the T-tubule. They're just fatter, and they're called terminal cisternae. So when you take a T-tubule with its two terminal cisternae on each side, we call that a triad. Those terminal cisternae, which remember are parts of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, contain high concentrations of calcium ions. And sarcomeres are the repeating functional units of the myofilaments, or the smallest functional unit of a skeletal muscle fiber. Each myofibril has about 10,000 sarcomeres. And then your muscle fibers are composed of many myofibrils. So remember, the muscle fiber is the largest, and then it contains myofibrils, and then myofibrils are composed of myofilaments. So about 10,000 sarcomeres per myofibril. Each one of those sarcomeres will contract. This is what a sarcomere looks like. Just the sarcomere. And this is showing you a myofibril, which can have 10,000 sarcomeres lined end to end. But what we're seeing here from Z line to Z line is one sarcomere. So just picture 10,000 of these units from Z line to Z line lined up in a row, and that's your myofibril. And then this entire structure here is a skeletal muscle fiber or muscle cell, and it's composed of many of these myofibrils. Okay, so within this myofibril, we're looking at one sarcomere. I want to say this before we get to the notes because the pictures aren't that good in the slides where you have the notes that go with them. This picture is really good. So I want to show you the Z line is what attaches sarcomeres to each other. And these little green molecules here, that's titin. It's called titin. So they're attached to the Z line. And then we have, just look at the purple, the structures that are purple that are in the middle of the sarcomere. They are the thick filaments or myosin. So the middle of that is called the M line. The very middle of the sarcomere is called the M line. So we've got Z line, M line, and then we have the band that is formed from basically the myosin, thick filaments, and a little overlap with actin, but it's basically it's the length of the myosin filaments, okay? So that is going to form something called the A band, and since they're thick, they're going to be darker. So this is how I remember the A band. I write the word dark. This is just my little dark, D-A-R. Oh my God, let me start over. Eraser. Okay, I'm going to try one more time. I've done this before. One day I will get better. Okay, so the dark has an A in it. So the A band is dark in color, and it's formed from the myosin filaments because they're thicker. That's why it's going to be the darker color of the striations that you see in skeletal muscle. But then the I band is just the region where you have only actin filaments, which are thin, so they are light in color. Anyway, you can see that light has an I in it. for I band. So A band, dark, because the thick filaments are darker. So the A band is going to stretch the length of the thick filaments or the myosin filaments. And then the I band is going to be, notice the I bands form from the ends of two sarcomeres. So we've got this one sarcomere and the actin filaments that are on the end here. And then the sarcomere that would come before it, that's the actin filament, the area that's just composed of actin on the end of that sarcomere. You can see it down here too. The I band is going to come from here to here. It's just going to represent the area that's only actin thin filaments. So it's going to appear light. So you have basically dark and light regions throughout, all the way down your myofibril because of the overlapping of the actin and the myosin. And you can also see here that there's an H band. The H band represents only where there's only myosin and no overlap of actin. And the zone of overlap is where actin filaments actually overlap with myosin filaments. So you're going to need to know this terminology when we go over how a muscle contracts, so the actual contraction steps. Okay. Oh, and here's your triad. Your T-tubules that surround the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then expanded ends are called terminal cisternae. So all of this together, two terminal cisternae and a T-tubule would be a triad.